Hyperspeed DeFi, never on a decline. Building the future, I feel like a savage.
Hello and welcome. I am Piers Ridyard, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. This is our podcast, The DeFi Download, a show about decentralized finance and all things crypto, where we dive into the details of the projects, assets, and services that are powering the DeFi revolution. Today, I have Albert Kstellana, CEO and co-founder of Yeager.ai, the creators of the GenLayer Protocol. GenLayer is an intelligent blockchain that can natively connect to the internet and can come to consensus on subjective decisions. GenLayer is targeting to be on testnet by the end of the year and launching in 2025. GenLayer will be focusing on prediction markets and decentralized games, as well as agentic DAOs. Albert, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks, Piers. How's it going?
Really good. Really good. How about yourself?
Yeah, everything is good. Plenty of busy.
Yes. A lot's been happening in AI and Web3 recently, so let's dive into it. Let's start off with, though, just like sort of very high-level, broad strokes overview. Like, what is GenLayer as a concept?
Yeah. So I've been in this industry for quite a bit now. I spent 3 years in Radix, if you recall, right? Actually, I met my co-founder Edgar's as well there, right? So we were there at 2018. Like, it was a great experience. Love the team, miss you all guys. But like, we've seen very up close like what it means to build an L1, right? And like the challenges of that, right? And what we saw as well is that for the last few years, it's been a bit tricky, like to find true innovation in crypto, right? Like, you've got smart contract platforms. They have more or less the same type of like things that they can do, right? So like different type of primitives like Uniswap and synthetics, Aave, all these different things, right? We saw most of them, the new ones, like back in 2018, 19, something like that, right? Since then, there's new things, but it's incremental. It's much more complex, right? So it's difficult for people to understand what's going on. And then what you see is like, sure, there's a new blockchain. The same type of primitives are being deployed. It's kind of like difficult to see completely new things, right? And we spent quite a few cycles trying to understand why is that and what we can do about it, right? So we started thinking like, there's a few limitations, such as, for example, being able to connect to the internet, which are not possible for blockchains right now, right? So blockchains are totally deterministic. They expect the same input gives the same output, right? All the validators of the network need to see the same thing, yes? That's the problem, because like when you want to go to the internet, well, the internet is quite random, right? Like, you can be asking 5 times the same website, the cookie has changed or the timestamp has changed, now the server is down, right? So we identified that being able to connect to the internet was one of these like limiting factors, right? And another one is that, they can only deal with code. Like, they're completely deterministic, static consensus algorithms that are, I have 5, I'm sending you 3, that's okay. If I want to send you 7, that's not okay, right? So this type of like, strict rules, like this code, like if, then, and so on, well, it's very powerful, but at the same time, it's a bit limiting. And we think that there's a lot that can be done as well if you had a blockchain that is capable of natively connecting to the internet, understanding what's out there, right? Like, not just through an oracle or not just price, anything. Who is the president of the US? Is it raining right now in Dubai? Like, whatever you want, yes? Like, is this just go fetch a signature from a user who just posted it on Twitter, for example, right? So the goal is, can we build a blockchain that can connect to the internet and make decisions based on natural language? And to do that, what we've done is we basically created this new type of like consensus algorithm at the validator stage, right? So like, there's a bunch of different pieces of the consensus that, right? What we're focused on is like, what does it mean that a transaction is valid or not? And instead of just focusing on the code-only execution, we're trying to put in like natural language, artificial intelligence to make that decision, right? So it's like, in other words, would be like, we're building a trustless decision-making protocol, right? That can connect to the internet and so on. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. And I think it's interesting to think about this idea that like, when you ask something of the internet, there can be many answers to the same thing. And what we do as humans when we go and search the internet is we have our own method for filtering out information that we think is valid or that is invalid. And like, often that is, sort of not always correct, but it's sort of like correct enough that it works for human decision making. And what you're kind of doing here is you're saying you can't just connect to the internet, you have to, once you have connection to the internet, you need to have some system that is able to work out what is correct from the information that's gathered from the internet. So that led on to this idea that you need an AI-based system. But then you sort of identified another interesting thing here, which is that when you ask an AI a question, it can come back with a different answer each time. So how do you solve that problem within your system?
I mean, if we talk about the consensus, right? It's like there was this guy called Ramon Llull in the year 2060 that he came up with, like how to do voting between different like people. The goal is, how do you create a voting system that gets the best type of result or output, right? The most truthful result, right? From here, then Condorcet started to look into, like the jury theorem, and like there's a bunch of different concepts on this that eventually became, democracy. It's like, okay, how do we choose which are the leaders of our countries who are making the decisions at what level of the, of society, right? So we're taking basically that type of approach. Like, okay, instead of having a single AI and say, okay, I just trust this one AI, whatever it thinks, or it has biases, it can be wrong, and so on. What we're doing is we aggregate the outputs of different large language models. So there's a bunch of validators. Each one of them are connected to a different large language model. And then they compare their output, right? What's happening is one of them is picked at random as the leader, makes a proposal, and then the other validators, running different large language models as well, they just evaluate the output of the leader and they decide whether that's acceptable or not, right? So it's like we're moving from a static consensus algorithm to a dynamic consensus algorithm where the developer of the application can say, we're talking about, let's say a prediction market on who the next president is going to be, right? Let's say Trump and Donald J. Trump are the same, right? Machines don't understand that. Like if you say like bit by bit, those two things are not the same thing. But if you ask an AI, it will understand that it's the same, right? So we allow the subjectivity, right? The developers can choose, I want you to be strict, or I want you to be not strict on the wording. If you think it's the same person, it's okay. You can accept that, right? So that's it. It's basically using the blockchain as a way for different AIs to reach consensus, right? That's one way to look at it, right? And the output of this is that we can create smart contracts that when they're going to an AI or when they're going to the web, instead of just getting any response that they get, they have to consensuate which is it that they saw, right? Mm-hmm. What is the output that's acceptable for them for that specific application, right? Which means, it's a bit of a different type of consensus in terms of, like we don't do ordering of events, we don't do prevention of double spend, nothing like that, right? We just focused on how do we get a bunch of different participants that are evaluating things outside of the network, right? LLM calls or web calls to reach an agreement. Yes. And it's by this, this optimistic democracy consensus algorithm, which we have defined.
Really interesting. And so I think to think about the brand new things that are able to be built here that were not possible before, you've got two core primitives of that, or two core ideas that GenLayer brings. The first is the ability to connect to the internet, and then the second is this ability to make independent decisions. But I suppose I should also say it's not just the ability to connect to the internet, it's also the ability to connect to other blockchains, or indeed reference itself to be able to work out what the next decision should be based on previous decisions or based on data that exists anywhere in the world, right? Or in any particular system.
I mean, there's other non-deterministic operations that can be done. Say, for example, floating point operations, right? So floating point operations are not really deterministic in terms of each computer will deal with them differently, which means that you cannot really do them on chain, right? Now, what you can do in GenLayer is you can put those things, say, for example, to calculate, the interest rate or whatever it is on a complex loan, for example, you can put that calculation on a non-deterministic block of code, and it will be able to execute that, right?
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing about that is that you don't lose the non-determinism of the system, but you do reach a consensus between participants as to whether or not the answer is right enough for the application. Though that does actually raise a question for me, which is how do you specify what right enough is?
So there is if you look a bit deeper into the execution environment, right? It's called the GenVM. there's basically like two different type of things that can happen, right? There's what's called the leader function, and then there's the validator function, right? And those two things means that the consensus will pick one leader that will execute the leader function. That can be code, it can be natural language, anything, right? It's just Python, right? Then what's happening then is that the other validators that are being picked for that specific transaction will need to run the validator function and decide if they agree or not on the output of the leader function, right? So what will be written in the ledger will be the output of the leader function, right? But all the validators that will be part of that consensus will run the validator function to see if they agree or not. Again, that can be code, that can be natural language, it can be anything you want, but it can be even agentic. You can say, go and fetch the weather in Dubai. I don't even tell you where it is. Let's see if the AI is smart enough to go and find which website has this information and come back with a response. Right now, that's not very reliable, to be honest, right? It will be better and better over time because, these agents are becoming better at moving and understanding what's happening out there, right? So, the idea is basically the validator function is the ruling thing, right? You just say the validator function will say, for example, the proposal that the DAO is voting on, that the leader has said that it's that should be gone for. It needs to be legal, for example. So that legal is a prompt just going to an LLM and say, hey, this proposal, is it legal? Yes or no? If it's not legal, I say no to this transaction acceptance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you talked about this idea of GenLayer enabling new types of primitives and sort of the primitives that enable applications that come out of this. And before we sort of got started recording, you mentioned two types. So one is sort of like DAOs that can autonomously make market-based decisions on funds under management and on contributions of market data and the bylaws of the DAO, which sort of goes along with your sort of like decision of whether or not this output is legal, where you're going, stage one, what should we do with these funds? And then stage two, is that within the bylaws of the DAO? Is really interesting. And then there's also we briefly discussed about the ability to run sort of bounty programs where the subjective input of people are turned into an objective measure on payment and performance. So you say, you need to do 5 high quality tweets about GenLayer that reaches an audience of this size and has these kind of authentic responses from people, and you can have the GenLayer system be able to determine the quality of the tweets, the quality of the responses, the quality of the interactions, and whether or not it fits within these sort of the metrics that you've set for this, which right now is a very human process, right? You have lots of systems in crypto that tries to reward people for actions, but those actions are either so automated that quality completely disappears, or they require a human in the loop every single time. So with those starting points, what do you see as being possible? And what do you see the main industries that are going to be disrupted by this, or what do you think is going to be accelerated as a result of these primitives being available?
Mm-hmm. So we identify two main reasons for GenLayer, right? One is if you're trying to do oracles and so on, if you're trying to connect to the internet right now, it's quite limited and expensive what you can do, right? Right now, for example, most oracles just deal with price data and so on and so forth. If you're trying to use much more subjective decision making, then you need humans in the loop, right? And that's something that through AI we can actually make much less biased. For example, we can make it much faster, much cheaper, right? So there's really quite a few, well, to me, endless types of applications that can be built, right? If you're basically connecting the blockchain to the internet, which right now you can't do. So for example, right now, if you want to verify a Twitter account, you really can't, right? If you're talking about real world assets, for example, here, the network itself can go and check your signature and verify your Twitter to see that it's you, and then it has you identified. With that, you can do, for example, under collateralized lending, real world assets, different type of digital identity, and so on, right? For example, if you want to touch base on those two things that you mentioned, right? The DAOs, right? Right now, most decentralized autonomous organizations are not decentralized nor autonomous, right? Some of them are, but what they're doing is they're trying to put code and then the voting essentially execute code. So that's as good as you can get with existing technology, right? But actually still most of them are just, they have a multi-sig and this is a bunch of people that will sign on something on behalf of what people have voted on Snapshot, right? So that's not really decentralized or autonomous, right? It's a bus factor of 20, right? The thing here is you can essentially connect a DAO to a intelligent contract that has a specific set of bylaws, understands what the project is about, can go to Snapshot to see what the community is voting and the proposals and so on, and can come up with a decision without any human intervention, right? This is the differentiation here, right? It's like you have an intelligent contract natively can connect to the internet, fetch that information, understand it, read it. If it's natural language, it can process it. If it's images, it can process it as well, and then it can make a decision that it can trigger a transaction, right? So you mentioned also, like the performance-based contract payment, right? I think that this is where we're really going, like as a society, to be honest, because like I think we're going to a world of micro tasks, like things that the AI or somebody else wants us to do or wants another of our AIs to do, and we can be paid for that, right? Now you need a trustless system that is capable of evaluating the outputs and deciding whether it wants to do this payment or not. If you did your job well or not, and you deserve this payment, right? Like right now, we're using Upwork, we're using Fiverr, we're using the legal court system. Let's say, right? Yes. What if you just have essentially a court system managed by AIs that just evaluate what's going on in this specific deal and just decide to release the escrow or not, right? So it opens a lot of things. I think, for example, one that I think is going to be very interesting. We've got some people working on this. Is automating like imagine a game, right? Right now, if you look at games on chain, mostly what they can do is just a bit of the randomness and really moving assets from one place to the other, right? So things like wax, right? Let's tokenize, let's say, the skin, right? Let's tokenize the credits, for example, for the system, right? What you can do with GenLayer is you can essentially define the game master, and then the game master is just an intelligent contract that's in Python, natural language, and so on. And it's capable of basically creating the story and evolving the story as the time goes by, right? So we've got a team working on a Dungeons and Dragons game, which is basically, the game master is just going to be making up what happens. So you will tell it, okay, I wanna stick, a stick on the ear of the monster, right? And the AI will be coming up with an output saying, okay, this didn't work because of that, right? Or what's the output, right? So we'll see quite interesting, types of applications being built in here. It really opens up what you can do.
I think one of the things that you touched on briefly there was this idea of like, well, there's two things. The first is this idea of a synthetic jurisdiction in which the output of a commercial relationship, if there's if there's some milestone that's been hit or there's some like disagreement, can be decided by a AI agent. I think that's really interesting. And then that you also talk about this idea that AI itself can decide, can start to push out into the real world and pull actions that it actually needs people to fulfill, right? That it can't fulfill autonomously on itself, but can make it so that it's able to pull in human help. Be that, I need this physical thing delivered from one place to another, or I need this, sort of this thing to be built. The sort of the end state of this, you're saying, is like, I think that this is going to go towards micro tasks. Is sort of like the almost the Uberization or gig economization of basically every single thing that humans do, which I think for some people is relatively dystopic, and I think that will sort of like there's a lot of people that have seen the problems that have been created by things like Uber and other things that have essentially pushed down the average earnings for people and has meant that a lot less people are able to sort of earn a living wage for something, which I think in the age of AI is going to be just a question that we're going to have to deal with as a society as well. We won't go into that, but on the first point, the sort of synthetic jurisdiction piece, this idea of being able to come to contractual terms between two people, or a person and an AI agent, or two AI agents, define what those contractual terms are, and then be able to autonomously decide whether or not those contractual terms have been met, I think is sort of one of the more like esoteric areas that are like have the biggest potential, right? Because your all human interaction generally sits on a combination of legal basis, either like constitutional or legislative based, or sort of commercial term based. And so if you're able to create a jurisdiction that is able to automate that, the possibilities are huge there, right? You really get to the point where it becomes very abstract, but very, very sort of potentially completely groundbreaking for what can be done. I suppose my question on that is like, where do you see like games? Games is kind of like a microcosm of it. Like you can create a game environment in which you have the rules in which people can interact, but a game can just be generalized to the concept of a society or a business environment or whatever. Like outside, once you've got games running, where do you think that this is going to then next go to? What are the first areas that you think that legal relationships are going to more and more be defined in AI within a synthetic jurisdiction?
If you think about human society, right? We basically have these two pillars that we've been building the whole society on, which is intelligence, right? We're intelligent, we then innovate. This innovation allows for other people to trust us. That's the second pillar, trust. And then this trust allows us to create certain structures that then allow us to become more intelligent, right? So, the agricultural revolution, we had the idea to start seeding and to start farming and so on. That gave the rise of, cities. And then that city allows people to get educated better, get fed better. That creates essentially this flywheel, right? Well, what's happening right now is that both of those two pillars, which is intelligence and trust,
I think there's a third pillar. I think there is a third pillar. It's intelligence, trust, and I think there's also specialization.
Specialization.
Yes,
right.
like the reason, like if you look at the history of humanity, the leaps forwards that occurred in sort of technology and innovation and all of this kind of stuff always started with a concentration of humanity. Like you had to have a large number of people in a single area, and when you got a large number of people in a single area, you had the ability to have specialization of skills, and the more specialization you're able to get, the more technically advanced that civilization was able to become, because they could rely on other people providing the other inputs. So like I can specialize in, I don't know, writing economics or like doing economic modeling, because I don't need to also know how to farm or how to make clothes. And that specialization was also critical.
Completely. So I mean that's the coordination side of things, right? So you see what you said. For example, if you look at the industrial revolution, right? People think intelligently. Hey, what if we create a machine? They innovate. They create the machine, right? Then they test this machine. Then they start to trust the machine. With those, they start to build factories, right? And then that allows them to get better. Like you said, like being able to specialize, and that increases intelligence and trust and the whole thing, right? What's happening right now is that AI is going to the core of intelligence, and blockchain is going to the core of trust. We're here doing blockchain because we think that we don't need to trust other humans, right, in order to have trust systems, right? We're building a trustless economy. Now, what's happening with AI is basically the same, right? We can make decisions without humans in order to become smarter and have innovation that will be coming as well in the short term, right? That will be not coming from humans, but from AI as well, right? So those two pillars, those three pillars really are being completely reshaped right now, this decade, right? Now, if you think what happens if you put those two together, right? That's where we are. Like this will be accelerating the whole flywheel, right? You're just saying like the two main things for me, like trust gives you this specialization and so on, right? So that is something that is being completely reshaped right now. And how important is AI? And crypto is that those two things are the key pillars for society, right? Now, what we're building a protocol that allows for humans and machines to be able to interact with each other in a way that right now is just not possible, right? So, like as you know well, legal systems right now are extremely slow, extremely expensive. It takes years, 3-5 years to finalize a litigation, for example, right? Takes forever, very expensive, millions of dollars. If you're trying to do smart contracts, well, they can't connect to the internet, they can't understand natural language. they are fast and they're cheap, right? So it's a very, very big innovation, right? What we're proposing here is, what if you actually created what if you have a jurisdiction that allows to have the trustlessness of a blockchain and the intelligence of, in this case, AI, in order to make subjective decisions, to essentially have the best of both, right? So that you can have self-enforcing, cheap and fast contracts that can deal with natural language and images and be able to fetch information from the real world, right? Live. The way we look at it is like, it's the only way that AI can actually be doing commerce. We don't think that in the future they're going to be like, do you really want your AI and my AI to deal with each other with a lawyer? Probably, it's an eternity for them to make a deal like that, right? Super expensive, right? Here is like, the more you can put, and you can put in code, and you can put in natural language, the more self-enforcing it will be, the cheaper and the faster it will be, right?
Yes.
We've got some people looking, for example, at the implementation of GenLayer as the first stage of a legal system, right? If you and I, we have a problem and we have embedded all the laws of that specific state on a contract, then we can essentially get feedback quickly on like who's right and who's wrong. If we still want to go through the legal like traditional legal process, we can still do that with humans, right? But it just makes things much faster, much cheaper.
Oh, that's interesting. Like, just as an aside, you guys should think about making, when you, in a legal contract, you have a specification of the jurisdiction of the contract, and you also have a specification, you can specify arbitration. If you created an arbitration clause that was GenLayer specific, you could force a decision on the legal contract to be arbitrated by GenLayer.
Yes, we literally are working on this.
Really cool.
This is very clear. As a matter of fact, like what can happen as well is that your AI and my AI can then create or draft a contract together, right? They can write the contract, again, natural language or Python. They can deploy it, and now they have set up their own trustless third party that will be overseeing that specific deal, right? So yeah, in terms of the long-term vision, this is it. It's like, we think that we're going to a world of AGI where everybody will have bunch of different AIs working for them, right? Some will be more autonomous than others, right? And we want to give them a place where they can be interacting with each other, right? And sure, games is just a very simple example of like how you set up this. That's where games are, like just like small examples of an economy, for example, right? But they show you what is possible.
So let's talk briefly about virtuals. So what are virtuals, and why is everyone going a bit crazy about them at the moment? And how do you think virtuals and GenLayer overlap?
So, as I said before, I think that blockchain has been a bit boring for the last few years, right? I think that people have forgotten some of the principles that brought us here, right? So like decentralization, for example, I think many people have forgotten that and think that better user experience is more important than decentralization, right? I think as humanity, there's this big pendulum, and right now we're in like, okay, it doesn't matter, I just want to make money. Then it goes back to the principles, right, and so on and so forth. This is how we work, right? Now, because of this, like I think that there has been a huge thirst for innovation and for new interesting things. And well, what you see with AI is that it's an unbounded, territory, right? Like there's blue ocean. You have no idea what will be possible, and it's like that. Really, I honestly think so, right? We saw that a little bit with DeFi summer, right? Like 2018, 17, 18, 19, right? Where like, okay, you can now create a pool where anybody in the world can put money and can trade against this pool. That's crazy, right? What can you do with this? You don't know, right? And that's what really moves the money in, and the whole ecosystem explodes, right? So what we're seeing right now is that there's, for the last few, I would say months, like 1 month, 2 months, something like this, really, there has been a lot of attention on these agents that are capable of, like having a state and then remembering and then acting, right? So like an AI agent is basically, you have this LLM, maybe just to take a step back, right? You have a piece of code. This piece of code is capable of going to an LLM and say, hey, what do you want to do next? And then the LLM answers something, right? Maybe it sends it the rules, for example, or let's say the persona, right? The character, right? And then the LLM responds following that interaction, right? With that, you can create in a loop. And now, for example, what some people are doing are connecting these loops into being able to write on Twitter, right? So now you have people on Twitter writing and messaging other AIs, that then these AIs have a state, have memory, have a personality in a way, and they are answering to them. So there's been a bunch of them. For example, one is called Truth Terminal, which basically Mark Andreessen put in like $50,000 or something like this just to see what it would be doing. Then there's there's been a bunch of different innovations on this one, like attempts to do this, right? I think that one of the ones that's getting more traction right now is called Virtuals, which is a marketplace for this. It's like very easy way to create an agent that connects to Twitter and Telegram, right? You just put in the information for, like you should know a lot about Radix. This is what you need to know about Radix. When people ask you on Twitter, you should be asking, right? You should be, answering with this context, yes? And like they made it super easy. And now people are starting to create different type of interactions that they can do, right? Can they play a game? Can they do a podcast, for example? Can they think about on DeFi where to invest and where not to invest, right? Can like an advisor, let's say, yes? And they can do that. And so, like again, it's an unbounded territory. And what Virtuals is essentially a marketplace and the framework to be able to deploy these agents and then put them in this marketplace to trading on them, right? Now, this is very different from what GenLayer is doing because we're really focusing on creating this synthetic jurisdiction. We want the agents to be living off-chain and to be able to deal with each other in a way that is as trustless as possible, right? Really focusing on making the correct decisions in a way that it's unbiased, that it has as few hallucinations as possible, right? Because this is the problem that you have, right? If you're trusting a single judge, the judge can be wrong, the judge can make things up, the judge can have biases, right? What we're doing is the consensus algorithm is trying to remove these biases and improve the correctness, right? Mm-hmm. It's like it's the wisdom of the crowd, right? Instead of getting a single person to give you an answer, which may be, let's say, 90% correct, you can ask 5 or then more if you appeal to essentially give you 100% correct answers, right? That's what we're trying to do. And so now there's a bunch of other agentic protocols like this, right? So there's like ELISA, there's Spec, there's quite a few of them. I think that it's going to be a very important narrative. And what we're seeing right now is that I think that there's still a bit of a suspension of disbelief in terms of like what it actually is, right? If I tell you Truth Terminal, where is it being run, right? It's not running on a permissionless network. Like it can be stopped right now, right? So what we will enable is for some of this to be completely unstoppable, right? And completely permissionless, right? So, and trustless. So, yeah, that's where we are.
I'm actually just going to pull you up on one point there. You said 100% correct. I think that's like, maybe you can disagree with me on this, but I feel like that's not actually the point. The point is that it is on balance the best answer given the input information, because like you're especially if you're making decisions on incomplete information, which you may be asking the AI to do, which humans have to do all of the time, it isn't necessarily that it's correct looking historically. It's the best answer given the information at that point.
Yes. I mean, these are subjective decisions, right? Yeah. And what we want is the developers of the application to have the wiggle room to say, like, what is the threshold of acceptance, right? When I said legal before, well, you need to answer like, okay, legal in which jurisdiction? It's not the same, right? And like if most of these AIs that are being used for this specific transaction, for example, if they're trained in the US, maybe they have that specific like legal mindset, right? So like, of course, there's biases still. There's things that are very much subjective. The way we're looking at this is like we want as much diversity as possible, and we want the crypto economics of the system to create this diversity, so that there's interest in taking the new technology, in taking now multimodal models, in taking different type of trainings, for example, for specific tasks, stuff like that. So yeah,
really interesting. So GenLayer, as you said, is going live on testnet this year. Going to be going live on mainnet next year, and the main thing that you're looking for right now is developers to come and build, right? And I suppose especially in where applications or businesses that developers want to build currently require humans in the loop to make subjective decisions that can now be replaced by GenLayer. So if a developer wants to get started and get building on GenLayer, where do they go?
I mean, the easiest way to start is just the docs, right? And the first thing that you will see in the docs is this URL, which is studio.genlayer.com, right? If you just go there, you immediately will see an IDE, and you will see already some examples that you, with a couple clicks, you will be running, basically, right? You will see, for example, one which is the wizard of the coin, which is kind of funny. It's like, I think one trend that we will be seeing very soon, we're already seeing already, yes, is AI games. So making the AI make the decision on whether you are worthy of the coin or not, right? So this is already happening with some of this suspension of disbelief, but this is something that you can make completely trustlessly on GenLayer, right? Another example is, say, for example, the prediction market, right? So like you can see how to define a prediction market. We've got this team from Radix as well, Delphi Bets, who's working on precisely this, right? Can they create an oracle like on the fly on anything so that they can create a prediction market, right? And they can do this, well, again, it's just like they can, for now, until we have testnet, they can deploy what we call a local net, right? Again, it's just a couple of commands. But then, like when it's going to be like testnet and mainnet, they're going to be able to connect through it, and then like from Radix, be able to connect to GenLayer to make a decision, and that decision will go, to fetch information from the internet and come back with a response, right? So yeah, best way to start really is again, it's like always, right? Like join socials and Discord and so on, right? But if you go to docs.genlayer.com or if you go to studio.genlayer.com, you will see all the resources there.
Awesome. Albert, thank you so much for coming on the show, and what a fascinating conversation.
Thanks, Piers. It's always good to see you, and thanks a lot for inviting me here.
More utility, then you better call on these guys. I'm going radical, I'm going Radix, I'm going radical, I'm going Radix. Hyperspeed DeFi, never on a decline, building the future, I feel like a savage.